Hello and welcome. In today's lesson, the Group 4 will introduce and discuss the history of Western art. The topics will be tackled are Post-Impressionism, Fauvism, Expressionism, and Cubism. The Group 4 will introduce themselves. Hi, and good afternoon everyone. I am Marian Miego, and I will be discussing the introduction, the summary, and the quote of the day.
A pleasant day to each and everyone. My name is Krismovic Malesio, and I will talk about Post-Impressionism, its definition and history.
Hello everyone, my name is Maris T. Paragoso, and I will be discussing the characteristics of Post-Impressionism era.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeremy M. Lamedo. I will be discussing about Fauvism and the definition of Fauvism and the history of a Fauvism.
Hi everyone, my name is Kaina Marie Ailey Putin, and I'm gonna discuss the characteristics of Fauvism.
Good day everyone, I am James D. Michon, and today I will be discussing about Expressionism.
Hello, my name is Maya Maringel P. Marstella, and I will discuss the important groups on Expressionism.
Hi everyone, my name is Vincent Blas B. Medrina, and my assigned topic is Cubism.
Hello everyone, my name is John Renyel Miasco, and I'll be tackling all about the phases of Cubism.
Now that you've met the members, let's fasten our seatbelts and let's begin.
Thank you, Ms. Mego, for that wonderful introduction. Now let's move to Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism is an art movement that developed in the 1890s. It is characterized by a subjective approach to painting, as artists opted to evoke emotion rather than realism in their work. While their styles, therefore widely varied, paintings completed in the post-impressionist manner share some similar qualities. For example, Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night. This includes symbolic motifs, a natural color, and painterly brushstrokes. History of Post-Impressionism. In the 1870s and 1880s, Impressionism dominated avant-garde art in France. Many up-and-coming artists, however, found fault in the Impressionist focus on style rather than the subject matter. Aiming to shake up the contemporary art world, this group of stylistically dissimilar artists, including Paul Cézanne, Paul Gauguin, Vincent van Gogh, Georges Seurat, Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, and Henri Rousseau, formed the Post-Impressionists, as seen beside At the Moulin Rouge by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. Like Impressionist artists, the Post-Impressionists shared their work with the public through independent exhibitions across Paris. In 1910, noted art critic, historian, and curator Roger Fry coined the term Post-Impressionism. With his show, Manet and the Post-Impressionists, much like the Post-Impressionists themselves, Fry believed that the beauty of art is inherently rooted in perception. That would be all. Now, let's have Ms. Paragoso for the continuation.
Thank you, Ms. Malesio. Now we will be discussing the characteristics of Post-Impressionism. First is emotional symbolism. As Fry explained, Post-Impressionists believe that a work of art should not revolve around style, process, or aesthetic approach. Instead, it should place emphasis on symbolism, communicating messages from the artist's own subconscious. Rather than employ subject matter as a visual tool or means to an end, Post-Impressionists perceive it as a way to convey feelings. According to Paul Cézanne, a work of art which did not begin in emotion is not a work of art. This 1901 painting, known as Pyramid of Skulls by French Post-Impressionist artist Paul Cézanne, it depicts four human skulls stuck in a pyramidal formation, a subject matter that increasingly preoccupied Cézanne in later life. Next is evocative color. Unlike the Impressionists who tried to capture natural light's effect on tonality, Post-Impressionists purposely employed an artificial color palette as a way to portray their emotion-driven perceptions of the world around them. Saturated hues, multicolored shadows, and rich ranges of color are evident in most post-impressionist paintings, proving the artist's innovative and imaginative approach to representation. Vision After the Sermon is an oil painting by French artist Paul Gauguin, completed in 1888. It depicts a scene from the Bible in which Jacob wrestles an angel. It depicts this indirectly through a vision that the woman depicted see after a sermon in church. Last is the distinctive brushstrokes. Like works completed in the Impressionist style, most Impressionist pieces features discernible, broad brushstrokes. In addition to adding texture and a sense of depth to a work of art, these marks also point to the painterly qualities of the piece, making it clear that it is not intended to be a realistic representation of its subject. Undergrowth with Two Figures in 1890 by Vincent van Gogh. Rhythmic pattern of thick brush strokes animates the surface of this painting, and trees in rows recess toward the dark background, making the couple seem trapped by the dense vegetation. Next reporter will be Mr. Yalamedo to discuss about the Fauvism era. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Mary Rose Paragoso. I will be discussing about Fauvism. Fauvism is a movement co-founded by French artists Henri Matisse and André Derain. The style of Les Fauves, or the Wild West, is characterized by a saturated color palette, thick brushstrokes, and simplified, often nearly abstracted forms. The movement flourished in Paris and other parts of France from 1905 until 1910. The history of Fauvism. In the 1890s, symbolist artist Gustave Moreau taught Matisse and other French painters like Georges Rouault and Albert Marquet at Paris. He called these Beaux Arts, or the School of Fine Arts. His deep appreciation for pure color and unconventional approach to art inspired Matisse and his peers to experiment with their own palettes and painting techniques in the year leading up to the turn of the century. Moreau's students were not the only future Fauves painters, exploring new frontiers of art at this time. Others, including André Derain and Maurice de Vlaminck, were also punishing paintings boundaries, especially the look to the flat compositions of Paul Cézanne and the exotic color of Paul Gauguin for inspiration. In 1905, this avant-garde advancement in painting were pushed to the forefront following the Salon d'Automne Salon, an independent art exhibition in Paris. Here, Matisse, Derain, de Vlaminck, and other artists exhibited their distinctive art, which was met the disdain by art critics, namely Louis Vauxhall, who famously described the artist as Les Fauves. Though intended to domain the movement, this term was embraced by the artists, who adopted it as their official title until the end of movement in 1910. Okay, that's all. Thank you. And the next reporter goes to Miss Kina Marie Lipitin. She will be discussing further about Fauvism and the characteristics of Fauvism. Okay, God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Yalamedo. So now, let's move on to the characteristics of Fauvism. The first one is the vivid colors. The characteristics most prominently associated with Fauvism is a bright and bold use of color. Matisse's large-scale painting, Le Buono di Vieva, illustrates this interest. Though the scene is based in a natural setting, Matisse formed neutral tones for a kaleidoscopic color scheme. In addition to orange trees, blue grass, and a pale pink sky, he also rendered the figures in a rainbow of hues. As you can see on the left drawing, it is the artwork of Henri Matisse called Le Buono di Vieva in 1905 to 1906. The second one is wild brushwork. The Fauves did not strive for realism in their brushwork. Introduced by the Impressionists and adopted by post-Impressionist artists like Vincent van Gogh, thick, painterly brushstrokes dominated their paintings. What set the Fauves' approach apart, however, is the preparation of the paint itself. Rather than apply their oils from a palette, Fauves would often squeeze tubes of paint directly onto the canvas. Similarly, instead of mixing pigments, they would suggest new colors through the use of small adjacent strokes. One of the examples is the Scène and Chateau by Maurice de Vlaminck in 1906, which uses the wild brush strokes. Lastly, the third characteristic is simplified forms. Taking a cue from Paul Cézanne, the Fauves experimented with abstraction. Rather than render forms as they appear in real life, they preferred painting them as simplified shapes. Similarly, like the post-impressionist pioneer, they played with perspective and skewed the picture plane, resulting in flat composition that emphasize color and brushwork over spatial depth. One of the examples of using simplified form is the artwork of André Derain, La Jetée à l'Estique in 1906. The landscape is painted with nothing but simple color shapes and lines. The next movement, entitled Expressionism, will be discussed by Mr. Michon. That's all for my discussion. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Ms. Lipitan. Expressionism. Expressionism is a modernist movement that emerged in early 20th century Germany. Artists working in this style distort the reality of their subjects in order to express their own emotions, feelings, and ideas. With an aesthetic and approach heavily inspired by the paintings of Vincent van Gogh and Edvard Munch, two artists viewed as predominant precursors of the movement. Expressionists employed artificial color palettes, energetic brushstrokes, and exaggerated textures in their works. Together, these characteristics culminate in avant-garde paintings that favor the subjective over the true-to-life in order to reveal a glimpse into the psyche of artists. As what you can see on the left side of your screen, The Scream by Edvard Munch, 1893. History of Expressionism. Expressionism is believed to have made its debut in 1905. At this time, artists in Germany were responding to two important yet dissimilar phenomena: the prevalence and popularity of Impressionism, and the seemingly chaotic state of the world in the years leading up to World War I. As what you can see on the left side of your screen, the exhibition of the German Expressionist group Die Brooks in the Gallery Ernst Arnold in Dresden in September 1910. And to continue Expressionism, let's have Miss Maristela.
Thank you, Mr. Mission. Since we already know the definition and history of Expressionism, I will now discuss the important groups or artwork of Expressionism. Die Brücke. This dual interest inspired the formation of Die Brücke, or the bridge, a group of artists whose name reference a youthful eagerness to cross into a new future. Based in Dresden, Die Brücke was led by Ernest Ludwig Kirchner and co-founder by Fritz Blaine, Erich Heckel, and Carl Smith Rotluff. On the left corner, we can see Ernest Ludwig Kirchner exhibit poster in 1910. Die Brücke continued to recruit new members in Dresden and other German cities for nearly a decade. In 1913, however, Kirchner published Chronik der Brücke, or Chronicle of the Brücke. Kirchner aimed to define and add structure to the movement with this written work, but his group member, viewed his interpretation as one-sided and decided to disband. The photo on the left side is another artwork of Ernest Ludwig Kirchner in 1906. Der Blue Reiter. Just 2 years prior to Die Brücke's dissolution, Der Blue Reiter, another expressionist group, formed in Germany. With Munich as its home base, the group was made up of artists of Russian and German descent, with Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc among the most prominent. The figures' artistic objective varied. However, they were united by an interest in exploring spiritual and a belief that art is more than meets the eye. The photo on the left side is an artwork called Blue Horse in 1911 by Franz Marc. For decades, Der Blue Reiter, which translates to the Blue Rider, was believed to reference a painting created by Kandinsky in 1903. However, it seems this painting title was given retroactively, leading art historian to believe another originous story. That this was simply inspired by a combination of Kandinsky's well-known penchant for the color blue and Marc equestrian interest. The photo on the left side is an artwork called The Blue Rider by Wassily Kandinsky in 1911. To discuss about the definition and history of Cubism, let's all listen to Medrina.
Thank you, Miss Maristela, and now I'll continue the report. Cubism. Cubism is an art movement that made its debut in 1907, pioneered by Pablo Picasso and George Braque. The style is characterized by fragmented subject matter deconstructed in such a way that it can be viewed from multiple angles simultaneously. As you can see on the left side, it is a painting that is titled Girl with Mandolin and was created by Pablo Picasso. History of Cubism. At the turn of the century, post-impressionism and fauve movements, inspired by the impressionist experimental approach to painting, dominated European art. French painter, sculptor, printmaker, and draftsman George Braque contributed to the Fauvist movement with his polychromatic paintings of stylists and landscapes and seascapes. On the left side, you can see George Braque's detail of landscape at La Chaussée. In 1907, Braque met Pablo Picasso, who is a Spanish painter, a sculptor, a printmaker, and a designer. At this time, Picasso was in his African period, producing primitive works influenced by African sculpture and mask. As you can see on the left side, it is an art created by Pablo Picasso, which is a portrait of Gertrude Stein. Mr. Miasco will be continuing the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vidrina. I'll be tackling all about the phases of Cubism. This artwork entitled Des Demioles de Avigon by Pablo Picasso 1907 is an example of proto-cubism. Before the movement was underway, both Picasso and Braque applied their elements of the soon-to-be style to their respective genres. Les Demioles de Avigon is perhaps Picasso's most famous piece from his African period. Dated 1907, it was created on the cusp of Primitivism and Cubism, as evident in the figures' mask-like faces and the fragment subject matter. This artwork entitled Still Life with a Bottle of Rum 1911 by Pablo Picasso is an example of analytic cubism. The first official phase of the movement is known as analytic cubism. This period lasted from 1908 through 1912, and it is characterized by chaotic paintings, fragmented subjects rendered in neutral tones. The fractured forms often overlap with one another, displaying the subject from multiple perspectives at once. Picasso also applied the principles of analytic cubism to his sculpting practice, culminating in a collection of busts and figures that emphasize the face's experimental approach to perspective. This artwork entitled Rum and Guitar 1918 by George Braque is an example of synthetic cubism. Synthetic cubism is the movement's second phase, emerging in 1912 and lasting until 1914. During this time, Picasso, Braque, Gris, and other artists simplified their composition and brightened their colors palettes. Synthetic cubism showcased an interest in still life depictions rendered as either painting or collage art.
Thank you, Mr. Miasco. For today's summary, Post-Impressionism is characterized by a subjective approach to painting, as artists opted to evoke emotion rather than realism in their work. Post-Impressionism characteristics: emotional symbolism, evocative color, distinctive brush strokes. Fauvism is characterized by a saturated color palette, thick brush strokes, and simplified, often nearly abstracted forms. Fauvism characteristics: vivid colors, wild brushwork, simplified forms. Expressionism is being distort the reality of their subjects in order to express their own emotions, feelings, and ideas. Important groups on Expressionism: De Broek, De Bla Rita. Cubism employs geometric shapes in depictions of human and other forms. Phases on Cubism: Proto-Cubism, Analytic Cubism, Synthetic Cubism. Here is a quote for today: "The vitality of a new movement in art must be gauged by the fury it arouses." By Logan Herschel Smith. Thank you for listening and have a great day.